Easter, also called Pasch or Resurrection Sunday, is a festival and holiday celebrating the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, described in the New Testament as having occurred on the third day of his burial after his crucifixion by Romans at Calvary c. 30 AD. It is the culmination of the Passion of Christ, preceded by Lent, a 40-day period of fasting, prayer, and penance. The week before Easter is called Holy Week, and it contains the days of the Easter Triduum, including Maundy Thursday, commemorating the Maundy and Last Supper, as well as Good Friday, commemorating the crucifixion and death of Jesus. In Western Christianity, Eastertide, the Easter season, begins on Easter Sunday and lasts 7 weeks, ending with the coming of the 50th day, Pentecost Sunday. In Orthodoxy, the season of Pascha begins on Pascha and ends with the coming of the 40th day, the Feast of the Ascension. Easter and the holidays that are related to it are movable feasts in that they do not fall on a fixed date in the Gregorian or Julian calendars, which follow only the cycle of the sun. Rather, its date is determined on a lunisolar calendar similar to the Hebrew calendar. The First Council of Nicaea established 2 rules: independence of the Jewish calendar and worldwide uniformity, which were the only rules for Easter explicitly laid down by the Council. No details for the computation were specified. These were worked out in practice, a process that took centuries and generated a number of controversies. It has come to be the first Sunday after the full moon that occurs on or soonest after the 21st of March, but calculations vary in East and West. Details of this complicated computation are found below in the section Date. Easter is linked to the Jewish Passover by much of its symbolism, as well as by its position in the calendar. In many languages, the words for Easter and Passover are identical or very similar. Easter customs vary across the Christian world, and include sunrise services, exclaiming the Paschal greeting, clipping the church, and decorating Easter eggs, a symbol of the empty tomb. The Easter lily, a symbol of the resurrection, traditionally decorates the chancel area of churches on this day and for the rest of Eastertide. Additional customs that have become associated with Easter and are observed by both Christians and some non-Christians include egg hunting, the Easter bunny, and Easter parades. There are also various traditional Easter foods that vary regionally. Etymology. The modern English term Easter, cognate with modern German Ostern, developed from an Old English word that usually appears in the form astrun, on, or, but also as astru, o, and astra or ostra. The most widely accepted theory of the origin of the term is that it is derived from the name of a goddess mentioned by the 7th to 8th century English monk Bede, who wrote that Ostermoneth was an English month, corresponding to April, which he says was once called after a goddess of theirs named Ostra, in whose honor feasts were celebrated in that month. In Greek and Latin, the Christian celebration was and is called Pi Alpha Sigma Chi Alpha, Pascha, a word derived from Aramaic, cognate to Hebrew. The word originally denoted the Jewish festival, known in English as Passover, commemorating the story of the Exodus. Already in the 50s of the 1st century, Paul, writing from Ephesus to the Christians in Corinth, applied the term to Christ, and it is unlikely that the Ephesian and Corinthian Christians were the first to hear Exodus chapter 12 interpreted as speaking about the death of Jesus, not just about the Jewish Passover ritual. In most of the non-English speaking world, the feast is known by names derived from Greek and Latin. Pascha. Pascha is also a name by which Jesus himself is remembered in the Orthodox Church, especially in connection with his resurrection and with the season of its celebration. Theological significance. The New Testament states that the resurrection of Jesus, which Easter celebrates, is a foundation of the Christian faith. The resurrection established Jesus as the powerful Son of God and is cited as proof that God will judge the world in righteousness. For those who trust in Jesus' death and resurrection, death is swallowed up in victory. Any person who chooses to follow Jesus receives a new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. Through faith in the working of God, those who follow Jesus are spiritually resurrected with him so that they may walk in a new way of life and receive eternal salvation. Easter is linked to the Passover and Exodus from Egypt recorded in the Old Testament through the Last Supper, sufferings and crucifixion of Jesus that preceded the resurrection. According to the New Testament, Jesus gave the Passover meal a new meaning. As in the upper room during the Last Supper, he prepared himself and his disciples for his death. He identified the matzah and cup of wine as his body soon to be sacrificed and his blood soon to be shed. Paul states, "Get rid of the old yeast that you may be a new batch without yeast, as you really are. For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed." This refers to the Passover requirement to have no yeast in the house and to the allegory of Jesus as the Paschal lamb. One interpretation of the Gospel of John is that Jesus, as the Passover lamb, was crucified at roughly the same time as the Passover lambs were being slain in the temple, on the afternoon of Nisan 14. The scriptural instructions specify that the lamb is to be slain between the two evenings, that is, at twilight. By the Roman period, however, the sacrifices were performed in the mid-afternoon. Josephus, Jewish War, 6.10, 423. Philo, Special Laws 2.27, 145. This interpretation, however, is inconsistent with the chronology in the Synoptic Gospels. It assumes that text literally translated, the preparation of the Passover, in John chapter 19 verse 14 refers to Nisan 14 and not necessarily to Yom Shishian. That the priest's desire to be ritually pure in order to eat the Passover refers to eating the Passover lamb, not to the public offerings made during the days of unleavened bread. In the early church, the first Christians, Jewish and Gentile, were certainly aware of the Hebrew calendar. Jewish Christians, the first to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, timed the observance in relation to Passover. Direct evidence for a more fully formed Christian festival of Pascha begins to appear in the mid-2nd century. Perhaps the earliest extant primary source referring to Easter is a mid-2nd century Paschal homily attributed to Melito of Sardis, which characterizes the celebration as a well-established one. Evidence for another kind of annual Christian festival, the commemoration of martyrs, begins to appear at about the same time as evidence for the celebration of Easter. While martyrs' days were celebrated on fixed dates in the local solar calendar, the date of Easter was fixed by means of the local Jewish lunisolar calendar. This is consistent with the celebration of Easter having entered Christianity during its earliest Jewish period, but does not leave the question free of doubt. The ecclesiastical historian Socrates Scholasticus attributes the observance of Easter by the Church to the perpetuation of its custom, just as many other customs have been established, stating that neither Jesus nor his apostles enjoined the keeping of this or any other festival. Although he describes the details of the Easter celebration as deriving from local custom, he insists the feast itself is universally observed.